Hello, precious poppets. I am sorry that I haven't got this to you earlier. I did attempt to start this at lunchtime with my children around, as you can see, come into the office instead, because it was just way too chaotic with school holidays and children around. All three. What I am going to do with you now is go through what I've decided is the article I'm going to work through you with is the Facebook legally declared addictive article. This is the background, so this is the information you'll need. You don't need much of this, to be honest, right? So you don't have to print that one out, but definitely print this one out at home, or at least have it up on your screens as we go through it. If you've got your little the Doozy Watch It technological version of the pen that connects to your screen that you can write little notes on, that's a good idea too. Otherwise, just have two screens up, one Word document and this document on the side, so that you can pretty much see what I'm doing and be able to sort of type up what I'm doing here. All right. Actually, you know what? Don't even worry about the background. No, don't worry about it, because there's a little bit of background here, and when it comes to your SAC and your exam, that's all you're going to get anyway. So let's not bother with that. That's just going to create more work that we don't need. So let's go with, and by the way, I've also created for you all in a very technological form, as you can see. I've spent a long time, formatting this for you and color coding it. It's just little handwritten sort of cheat sheet notes for you. Essentially, just really going completely step by step as to what to do when you're reading the article or any article. The tone words I'd recommend that you learn and utilise. These are sort of more common ones that you could refer to. How you need to sort of chunk your little sections, what evidence to look for, or what devices, I should say, to look for, what they would look like to help you identify them, and how to actually look at the structuring of the argument, because that's really key here. It's not like the hardest parts, I reckon, are it's not the being able to like circle a section and go, what's the mini argument here? Because that's really just going, all right, so if I just look away from that, what were they trying to tell me there? What are they actually saying? And we're going to do all that together anyway. But it's being able to go, this is a fairly, there's a lot of logical appeals in here. This is a fairly logical argument. This one's a fairly emotional argument. This one's more educational and informative. Being able to recognise, being able to recognise the types of arguments that appear and why they appear in that order, and being able to talk about that. And there's a really easy way of doing that, actually, where you actually sort of cover it a little bit in your intro and sort of say they started with this, covered a bit of this style of argument, and then finished off with this style of argument, essentially to ensure the reader empathises with the young people becoming addicted to Facebook, irrespective of their age, but secondarily also appreciates all of the research that has gone into supporting the argument that Facebook is addictive and should be banned, or whatever it is, right? But you actually sort of finish off your introduction with a statement like that, so that then all you have to do after you've finished your introduction, which we'll do together, is to introduce each section, and I'll go through that, the chunked sections, the chunked arguments, is to introduce them all in the first sentence, where you would normally just go, so-and-so argues, initially argues that, whatever the mini argument is, you're actually going to not only state that, but say, this is a prime use of a logical appeal, and the person opens with this to better inform the readership of their own credentials and knowledge in the issue, because and again, in this that I will scan and send to you along with this video, I have in there, hang on, I've done a little bit of writing. I have in here quick hints with argument types, appeals, and structure. And in this document, it's like, well, if it's them using emotional appeals, what's the purpose of an emotional appeal? Why would they open with that? Well, it's to try and get the reader to empathise with, whoever's being targeted. They're trying to get the reader really personally invested in the argument. They want the reader to picture themselves in that situation, all of those little sort of statements that you can use in those opening sentences, right? Okay, so just number that one and number this one. 6 pages. 6 pages of fun for you guys, because analysing argument is just, it's a joy, isn't it? Isn't it a joy? All right, so let's look at, say we've got 10 minutes of reading time. What do we do in that reading time? Right, well, we're going to look at the background so that we can at least make one very clear statement of the issue statement, because that's how we open our introduction. The issue of whether or not bloody blah, bloody blah has been widely debated in recent Australian media. So let's have a look at, it says, and I'm going to read along with me. The following opinion piece was published on the website of Adelaide Now, a conservative media outlet. So that's quite important. If it's conservative, they're your Karens, okay? They're the ones that don't like change too much. Many people reading this newspaper would believe in standing up for justice for the ordinary, everyday person. That doesn't give much into the actual background of Facebook. So let's go back to this very quickly. While social media sites can be addictive and can be harmful, parents and individuals also need to take responsibility for their actions. The destructive consequences of social media are well known and well documented. It's about time action was taken against these companies. People are only suing these companies because they're super rich. Lawyers are... okay. So there's a few different views on this. Let's just work out what the issue is. In March... Okay. All right, so the arguments we're looking at are that social media websites are designed to be addictive. The dangers of social media are proven. It's about time these companies were held responsible. Social media features perpetuate harm. And this is not about free speech. It's about harmful design. Background. In March 2025, an American jury found Meta and Google were negligent in the design of their social media apps because they had created platforms that were designed to be addictive. This came about because a young woman had said that these platforms like Facebook and Instagram had addicted her and contributed to her poor mental health. Her lawyers focused on the design of these platforms, which utilise features that also keep people gambling and playing the pokies late into the night. People praised the jury's decision to find Meta negligent, comparing big tech to cigarette companies who know about the harm of their addictive products but still market them anyway. Whilst others have argued that people need to take responsibility for their own decisions and not blame the products that they use. Okay, so the issue of whether or not, what are they called? Social media platforms, whether or not social media platforms, and particularly the tech companies that create and run them, the issue of whether or not social media platforms, and particularly the tech companies that create and run them, have been both negligent and accountable. No, don't do that. The issue of whether or not social media platforms, and particularly the tech companies that create and run them, are at fault for leading social media users into addictive disorders has been widely debated in recent Australian media. So I was getting confused about going, are they, we're saying, are they negligent, are they accountable? At the end of the day, it's just whether they're at fault. Is it their fault, or is it the fact that we keep logging on? That's really what it's boiling down to there. So I'll state it again. So your written analysis, your introduction, will open with the sentence, the issue of whether or not social media platforms, particularly the tech companies that create and run them, are at fault for leading social media users into addictive disorders has been widely debated in recent Australian media. And then once that's done, we get rid of the background. We're not looking at background anymore. Background is not a concern for us. All right. Now we have a look here. We have a looky-chooky because it's now our, so it's our writing time. We've got the issue down for our introduction, and now we just need to focus on what our intro is. In order to do that, we've read through the entire article during our reading time, and we have deduced what I love this office so much, it's so fun being here. We have deduced what the contention of the author is. So the author is Caleb Bond. He wrote this on March the 26th. The heading is Meta and YouTube finally held responsible for addictive platform design. Keywords there, finally, and addictive. Right? So we already know, is he stating that, well, we're the ones logging on, it's our fault, or that it's the company's fault? He's stating that it's the company's fault, and it's high time that they be held accountable for being so negligent in the development design of their apps. I would love to just be able to go, I'm sure that's the contention. 100%, yep, I can tell from the heading. Well, we have an inkling from the heading, a very strong inkling. We'll say 98.6% inkling. However, it would be very neglectful for us to not read the entire article and have a look at the visual, right? Before we actually really decide upon what is the contention. Because sometimes the contention can be twofold too. It could be that the media, the Meta Tech and YouTube and that are definitely at fault, and that they should pay out, all of their affected families millions of dollars in retribution, whatever. All right, so we're going to read this together, children. And as I'm reading, what I do want you to note is that there are so many little sections here. So we've got the heading's a section, and we've got another little section here, 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 big section here, big section here, another little section here, right? Essentially, if you were to try and do that in terms of mini paragraphs in your writing, you'd be looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and a visual included in one of them, right? So about 9 or 10 little paragraphs. That's a lot. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is chunk them together. So we go through each section, go, what is this section before the space telling us? what is this section before the space telling us, what is this section before the space telling us. And if any of them link up or match or complement each other in some way, like they work together really well, we're going to chunk them completely, right? We're going to put a big circle around that so that we don't have bloody, 10 to 12 little bits of writing in our analysis. It looks better to the examiner and the assessor if you are able to read through and go, yep, that section's argument is the same as that section's argument, right? That makes you look clever, so we like to see that. So he starts with, the big social media companies are now on notice that they cannot operate with impunity as though they were innocent facilitators of conversation. Okay, what's he telling us here? He is telling us that the big tech, like big pharma, big tech, have previously, what would I say, ignored accountability, ignored or surpassed, not succumbed to, have previously not considered themselves responsible for the adverse effects of social media. Have avoided responsibility. Big tech have avoided responsibility, have previously avoided responsibility for the adverse effects of social media, right? So I just put a little note there. It's just like, what's the point of those sentences? What's the point? What's the mini argument being made there? How can I tell that? Because he says they cannot operate with impunity, oh no, you can't touch me. I've got the immunity necklace in Survivor. I can survive through this. You can't touch me. You can't vote me out. I'm not responsible here, right? So they can't act as if they didn't know and they're not responsible. Like as if they were social media is just two people chatting to one another. That's all. I'm just a facilitator of conversations between people. I don't create addictive platforms, right? Because that's what he's suggesting. They would normally shirk responsibility. All right. For 2 decades, these companies, including Facebook's owner Meta, have thrown their hands into the air and protested that no ill on their platforms is their responsibility because they're just the poor sods who've let the rest of us do stupid stuff online. That has now been debunked by a decision of a Californian jury to hold Meta and YouTube responsible for the mental harm caused to a young woman who used their websites. Right. Haha, look at this. So if I go, what are they saying there? What are they saying? What's he saying in this section here? He's saying that they've previously avoided responsibility. So look at that. That matches this first section. I can link those two together. That's the same argument. All I would add on there is what we have now. We have a little shift. We have a little shift of tone here because he's being quite facetious and condescending towards the companies, being like, oh yeah, they've thrown their hands up in the air. Oh no, you just did stupid stuff online. No. Right, so he's sort of mocking them. Right, so I'm going to also write a little note here for myself going, he's kind of mocking, condescending in his tone here, but then he shifts as soon as he says, that has now been debunked by a decision of a California jury to hold Meta and YouTube responsible for the mental harm caused to a young woman who used their websites. So that's a dramatic shift and a statement of fact, just this little last section here. And I want to see if that's going to be supported because those are two really important little elements here that I can link together. The jury found that these social media websites were deliberately designed to be addictive and that they were negligent in not warning users of the dangers. Of course, there is an element of personal responsibility in all of this, but the mechanics and the dangers of social media are now well researched and proven. Okay, so we have this whole little section here. So if I was to highlight that for you, right? Because this can definitely occur sometimes. We have, because it's not always going to be based on your, what am I trying to say? It's not always going to be based on the spaces in the document, right? Because now these are, so that would be my first mini argument. And even though there's no space there, the second mini argument actually gets introduced at the end of that first mini argument. So I'm going to link those two together. Let's see if I can link some more. I understand that every company with an advertising-based income wants consumers to interact with its product for as long as possible. So do we in the news business. I've been involved in the process of selecting stories and deciding where they go, hoping that a good front page will encourage people to buy the newspaper and that the stories from there onwards will keep people turning the page. Right, that is a completely different argument and a shift in tone again. So what we have here is we have our first argument that big tech had avoided responsibility for the adverse effects of social media. The second thing that the second argument that's being made is that finally the long-awaited decision. Also, actually, not finally. So yes, hold on. Finally. He's saying that finally they are being held to account and their ill motives recognised in law. Right? Which makes their negligence fact. Okay, so their negligence is no longer debatable, it is now fact. Negligence is now fact. Right, so I'm writing all of these little things down. And as you can see, even me going through this now for the first time, I just decided on this article before I was videoing with you. I have to think and go through what I'm going to write as well. So don't feel like because the answers don't jump out to you straight away that, you're beyond this task and you can't do it. You can. You just need to go through. Once you've done the sections, the rest is so easy. This is sectioning it and finding out what those mini arguments are and then going, is this logical, emotional, educational, problem solution based, whatever. What type of argument's happening here is the hardest part. The rest of it and actually writing it up is a breeze. All right. Now, before we go on, I don't want to ignore the visual, right? The visual here, we have and the caption states, the families of victims raised photographs of their loved ones who passed away after they became hooked and experienced a variety of negative mental health effects. So this is would you say that's a logical argument? Absolutely not. That is such an emotional argument being made there, right? And I'd probably try and link it with the, I'd link it actually with the second one, even though the second argument, and it's interesting, but it works well, even though the second argument is stating fact here, right? It's stating that, now they've been found guilty, right? And that's a fact. They're not letting us forget the human faces of the impact of this addictive social media, right? They're showing us, they're also supplementing this and complementing this logical appeal argument here with an emotional argument, because they've talked about, and this is why I'd link it. So annoying. This is why I'd link it, is because it says the jury found that YouTube was responsible for the mental harm caused to a young woman who used their websites. So here's pictures of all the other young people or older people or whatever that use the websites and also lost their lives due to, mounting depression, due to addiction, whatever. And so this puts human faces to the people who are really suffering from this. So it's not just a big company that's, using their money to do the wrong thing. It's affecting the little people, right? And that's a really powerful statement in there. Okay, so the argument being made here is there is a real human face and story behind the crisis of social media addiction. Right? So there is a real human face. There's a real cost of human life here. Right? That ups the stakes a fair bit too. And you wouldn't be able to claim that without the caption, so you're going to have to refer to the caption there. But I'd be linking these two together. All right? Then, I understand that every company with an advertising-based income wants consumers to interact with its product for as long as possible. So do we in news business. I've been involved. I do this, I do that. That is an anecdote, all right? That is often making the author seem more relatable and human to the readership as well. But essentially what he's trying to say here in saying, I understand that every company with an advertising-based income wants consumers to interact with its product for as long as possible. What's he trying to manipulate us? What's he trying to convince us of? He's trying to convince us of the fact that he's coming at this with a balanced view. I have a balanced view. I also am involved in an advertising-based income. Author also involved in ads-based income. So he's demonstrating a diplomatic approach here. And what does that do? What's the purpose of that? He's showing us that he's got a diplomatic approach, that he understands where the tech companies are coming from. He understands, he feels them, it's cool, I get it. He is supporting the view of his own credibility. Right? He's showing you I'm credible, I'm reliable, I'm able to see things from both perspectives. I'm balanced in my view. I'm very balanced, right? But a newspaper works completely differently to a social media website. There was a time when social media companies effectively operated as big tobacco once did, aware of the dangers of its product but keeping mum because the public knowledge had not yet caught up. This decision holds them responsible for that, and rightly so. Right, so this is a really interesting, because I definitely link these two, because one doesn't work without the other. So first of all, he says, I'm balanced, I get it, I know what it's like to work for a big company, right, and need people to consume my product, because I write newspaper articles and you all have to buy the newspaper, right? Same as a tech company who's created a big platform and needs you to download it and buy a subscription to it. I get it. But then he says, hang on a minute, but a newspaper does work differently. And there was a time when, and what he's doing, he's comparing. So while he's just said, I'm very balanced, however, I'm telling you that the decision, so this is the argument here, the decision to make big tech accountable is right. And he gives the case study of tobacco companies. And what that's doing is providing a case study which has a lot of ill feelings about it, right? Because the public absolutely feels completely betrayed by big tobacco companies back in the day. Back in my day, like cigarettes were just everywhere. And I mean, at uni, I was working in a restaurant, and everybody just smoked in the restaurant. Every bar you went to, any club you went to, everyone was just smoking. It was just cigarettes everywhere. And people who have either smoked during that time, socially smoked, whatever, or have even quit or never smoked but got exposed to all of that secondhand smoke, they all hold the big tobacco companies accountable and responsible for putting out this product knowing full well that it caused cancer and not caring because they knew people would get addicted to it and not be able to stop buying it. And I can tell you vaping is exactly the same, does the same thing. A lot of people will switch to that to give up smoking, and then they get stuck on vaping, which has its own issues too. All right. So I'd be linking those two together. Realistically, like, those two arguments aren't that, like, they're not that impactful. I mean, I'd have a very small section on that. There's not much to bite into with them. But let's go to the next one now. All right, so this next one, but now that the screws are on, they need to be tightened even further. Social media platforms have for too long operated in a legal grey area where they are treated as facilitators of discussion rather than publishers of content. Facebook, for instance, has never been held responsible for defamatory content posted on its platform because the person or company that posted is deemed to be at fault, not the person hosting the person commenting. A defamation case in 2021 that involved the publisher of the advertiser even found that individuals and companies were responsible for the comments made underneath their posts. But in reality, those posts or comments would never have seen the light of day if not for Facebook or some other social media platform. All right, so now he's saying, oh, look, it's great. That's awesome. We know that they're addictive. We know, okay, that's awesome. Win. All right, we've held them responsible for that, but let's hold them responsible for all the other defamatory crap that gets posted under their name's umbrella. Just because Sally Sue wrote that Peter Pettigrew was a fat jerk online and hurt Peter Pettigrew's feelings, even though, who did I say, Sally? Susie. Even though Susie wrote it and she's, absolutely responsible for that, Peter would have never seen that comment and never been harmed if Susie didn't have a channel in which to direct her hatred and criticism of Peter Pettigrew, right? So he's saying it's not enough. The argument here is it is not enough to hold them culpable for addiction, but also need to be clear legal definitions around their responsibility and responsibility around comments posted under their site name. All right. So essentially, it's not enough to just hold them accountable for addiction, but for all of the other defamatory comments that are made in their name, so to speak. So that's a very new argument. That's an interesting one. And that's a very passionate tone to this one. Facebook, for instance, it's a defamation case. Now the screws are on. They need to be tightened even further. This is quite a passionate tone here. All right. Passionate tone. We had mocking and condemning at the start, going to quite logical, sort of informative about what the jury's found. Then we've got the very highly emotional visual there. Right, so we're starting with mocking, condescending, attacking. Then we're going to logical. Then we're going to I'm balanced, understand me, but yet I see that these people are still dangerous. And now we're going to a fervent argument that they're actually more dangerous than you think, right? So he's easing his readership into his argument, right? Where he's said that, yeah, they are responsible and they've been found so, and that's great, but there are bigger issues at hand here. And this is, such a perfect example of why it was good that I didn't write the contention straight away, because there's more to this contention. All right. Almost at 35 minutes. God, I can talk, can't I? The next section. If I were to write something defamatory in this column, my employer could be sued because it allowed that content to be published. It would be in the pages of this newspaper and website, and thus the company is at fault. But when it comes to social media, we give them a free pass and don't hold them to the same standard for what they allow to be published on their platforms. This is such a good argument, can I just say? This is such a good argument. And I would... Can I link all of those? No, I think I'd keep that as separate because he's using a hypothetical. He's being anecdotal here. If I were to write something defamatory in this comment, and he's being incredibly rational, using a lot of really clever logic in this, which is quite different from his very passionate sort of like there's more here and these people should be held responsible for, their comments and stuff. It's like, hang on a minute, you hold us accountable as a newspaper, because if I write something in my article that, says, yeah, Peter Pettigrew's a fat jerk, and I'm writing for the Herald Sun, then they get told off. They get sued because they allowed it to be published. Sorry, lights. Why isn't Facebook doing the same thing or YouTube doing the same thing? And then this continues, this little section, all right? So it says, why? Social media is basically one great big letters to the editor section, right? Because in a newspaper, whatever's published, then everyone can write in the next week. It was like the archaic form of Facebook or social media. They would read the newspaper and go, I don't agree with Billy Bob's view on what's happening to the car parks at Woolies. I'm very angry and I'm going to write in a letter to the newspaper and tell the world about it. Yes, I am. And that's what they would do. So he's quite right. Social media is basically one big letters to the editor section, but we're responsible enough to vet the letters we publish. Like as in, the editor of the Herald Sun goes, maybe I should just check on this before we post this because I don't think that the dropping the F-bomb 16 times in a comment will really impress the readers of this newspaper. So we might not publish that one. Facebook doesn't do that. They just ignore. And it would be a huge job, yes, but there's also AI now, so it shouldn't actually be an unattainable goal. But we are responsible enough to vet the letters we publish. And if we printed one calling someone a pedophile and in fact they were not a pedophile, then we'd be up for an awful lot of money. Whereas on social media, they do this crap all the time. All right, so he's very rational here. He's providing a really strong rationale for why Facebook, YouTube, all of the Meta company and all of the affiliated apps should be held accountable for all content published, not just for being addictive and knowingly so and still marketing their product, which is the first part of this article, but to be responsible for the defamatory comments that other people post under their platform and under their platform's name. All right. And then it finishes, and this is, guess this tone. Old mate Zuckerberg, however, doesn't have to worry about such things. Facebook and all the other social media platforms are publishers. They profit from the content published on their platforms, and they ought to be subject to the same rules and responsibilities as everyone else. We have their facetiousness or sarcasm, old mate Zuckerberg, because he's not really his mate, is he? No, I don't think he likes Zuckerberg very much. So we have this little, facetiously begins, with an I'm trying to say like another word for inkling, but with an exaggerated notion of familiarity, like pretending he's really familiar with Mark Zuckerberg. Anyway, old mate Zuckerberg, however, doesn't have to worry about such things. Facebook and all the other social media platforms are publishers. They profit from the content published on their platforms, and they ought to be subject to the same rules and responsibilities as everyone else. It's actually a really poorly written ending to the article, can I just say, because it's not a really good sentence structure. But I'm not here to critique the writer. I'm here to analyse the writer. So I won't say that he ended with a really ill-structured sentence. What I will say is that he does finish by saying that essentially the argument he's making is Meta is at its foundation a publisher, and should, therefore, the same laws should apply to them regarding defamatory content. Regarding defamatory content published. All right. So if I was to colour coordinate this, all right, now I'm sort of sectioning those bits together. So this will be my first little bit of writing, and I'll include the heading in that. So that's always a good thing to do. All right, don't ever forget the heading. I'll include that in the first little bit, what they open with. Then there's that. I wish I had extra highlighters, because this is really going to be a very unfortunate little circumstance here. What I'll do is steal someone's. I'll give them back. Then these ones I'd link together, although I don't even know if I want to talk about those ones. Maybe a little bit, because it does link into the tobacco company, but other than that, it's a really pretty dry area. This one has its own point and tone. And what colour haven't I used? Orange. And this one goes in with the big finisher. Right, so you will have in your analysis, not including your introduction will be up here, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little sections of writing that are sectioned, okay? Stay tuned for the next part, because I'll end this video and then I'll do the next video in the actual write-up of it, so we can write it all together and get it done. At least I probably will, just for time's sake, I will probably leave this bit out so that we just have 4 bits of writing, just to make it easier for every single person involved, including myself when I mark all these. All right, I'm going to hang up from you. I'm going to end this, and this will be named part 1.